One of the main features of my overall work in philosophy, both my popular and academic work, and also my general approach, is that of philosophical eclecticism. So I thought that in these philosophical developments and commitments videos, it might be very useful for me to talk about what I mean by my own eclecticism, distinguishing it from things that other people have in mind when they say that term, and talking about why that works well for me and how I ended up in that. I don't say that everybody in philosophy should be an eclectic. As a matter of fact, if you are an eclectic, you probably have a vested interest in other people not all being eclectics, because it provides you with the raw material that you could say you are drawing upon and sampling and synthesizing into something that works for you. But I am, philosophically an eclectic. I'm somebody who wears many hats. A lot of viewers in watching me are surprised to, see when I do a Nietzsche video that I seem to be a Nietzschean. When I do a video on St. Thomas Aquinas, they think I'm a Thomist. When I do a video on Plato, they think I'm a Platonist. And that's because I draw bits from each of them. I think I managed to cull out what is really valuable and what are the strengths of their philosophy, and I try to avoid the weaknesses or the blind spots that they have. So let's talk first about, what does this term eclectic mean? I want to say from the beginning it's an ambiguous term, right? So there's multiple meanings to it. I'm not going to say that we have to take one single meaning as the only legitimate or even as the most legitimate meaning. I will say that lexically it comes from Greek, as many of our philosophical terms do. Ek, out of, and then the lectin is the drawing upon, I suppose if I was Heidegger, I could come up with all sorts of cool etymological stuff, but I'm not going to worry about that because that's not really what I'm interested in. I think that one sense of eclectic that doesn't really apply to me, but a lot of people have in mind when they say that word, or when they are describing themselves or talking about other people, is somebody who just sort of picks and chooses, at whim or at random, whatever it is that they like. So, you ask somebody, what kind of music are you into? And they say, I have eclectic tastes. And that means that they sort of pick and choose a little bit of everything. I'm not really like that in philosophy. As a matter of fact, I don't even really try at this point to do a representative sample. I need something from 19th century German philosophy, and I need something from 19th century French philosophy, and something from 20th century Anglo-American analytic, and some classical American. I don't do it that way, right? I'm not a person who picks and chooses sort of on a quota system or anything like that. Although actually when I do teach classes, I try to give a good representative sample of what there is out there. There was actually a movement in philosophy that I should mention as well, that was called eclecticism and associated with Victor Cousin and other intellectuals, and they were doing something a little bit closer to what it is that I mean by eclecticism. But when I think of somebody who's an eclectic, one of the key thinkers that has really grown on me over the years, and who I kind of look to as a model, is Cicero. If you ever read Cicero's dialogues, and I'm going to shoot one of these videos specifically about why it is that I love Cicero so much. Cicero it's almost like he's telling a joke, right? An Epicurean, a skeptic, and a Stoic walk into a bar, except in this case they're walking into Cicero's house, or they're hanging out, and they're going to talk about the nature of the gods, or the way a republic should be set up, or what is the final good and the worst evil for human beings. And he's going to set them up to talk with each other, and to present their positions, and to criticize other positions on the way in very, very structured, sometimes very erudite ways. and then they're going to critique each other. So it's a really a genuine dialogue. I love Cicero's dialogical works, and even in his less dialogical works, where he's just presenting, some theories, he'll draw from a number of different thinkers and schools, and that's part of what I really like about that approach, that eclectic approach. You got to know the philosophical sources inside and out. You take what you find valuable from them. You perhaps strip off the elements that you don't find valuable. You have some reason why you're doing that. And that is the approach that I myself take in philosophy. So I probably should say something about who I draw upon, and I'll do that very briefly here, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a bit, and why I'm particularly attracted to them. So I think a lot of people know me these days in part because of my connections with the modern Stoic movement and being editor of Stoicism Today. I really do draw quite heavily on Stoicism. Stoicism is something that I began researching 20 years ago, and I'd say in the last 10 years I've really gotten into it in a serious way. I see it as a pretty valuable set of conversation partners. But I'm not actually a Stoic in an orthodox sense. There's some things about Stoic philosophy that I don't completely accept, and so I don't actually call myself a Stoic, although I'm fine if other people want to tell me that I am. Similarly, I draw very strongly on the Aristotelian tradition, but I'm not really an Aristotelian, although I am very Aristotelian in certain respects. I draw upon the Platonist tradition, which doesn't just include Plato himself, but also Middle Platonism with people like Plutarch, where it's being systematized, some Neoplatonic thinkers, some of them pagan, some of them, I like Philo of Alexandria, I like some of the Christian Neoplatonists, right? There's a lot of Christian thinkers who I find quite interesting, sometimes precisely because of what they're doing when synthesizing Christianity and Greek philosophy, sometimes in spite of that. And that takes me through the Middle Ages. I read and draw quite a bit on John Cassian, on Augustine, of Clement of Alexandria, on Anselm of Canterbury, Thomas Aquinas, but I still don't belong to any of them in the sense of being an ist, right? And then there's many modern thinkers who I particularly like. There's a lot of things I really enjoy in Descartes' philosophy, although I'm not a Cartesian. There's a lot of things I think are really cool about Leibniz and about Hume. And even about Kant, I think a lot of people know me, of course, because of the half-hour Hegel series, and I do use Hegel. I think he's right about some things. I don't buy the overall scheme, and I'm not really a Hegelian in that sense. Kierkegaard, Marx, Nietzsche, these are all thinkers who I really enjoy some things from and draw upon, but I'm not a member of their school. So if you wanted to say it very broadly, you could say that in my thinking, in my practice as a philosophical counselor, as a consultant, I draw upon the Platonists, the Aristotelian, the Stoic traditions, even sometimes the Epicureans or the skeptics. A lot of Christian philosophy, some of which is much more Augustinian, some of which is more Aristotelian based, like in Thomas, Descartes, Hobbes, Hume, Leibniz, Pascal, of course, very important thinker for me. Some of the other more contemporary approaches, dialectical, we might call it, in a certain respect, deconstructive. There's some things about that I like. I like the psychoanalytic tradition, or at least parts of it, right? Particularly Jacques Lacan, I'm interested in, and Hans Kohut. And then some of the other people. We could go on and on and on. The existentialists, right? Although they're a mixed bag too. So I draw upon all of this stuff, And, I'm not saying that I have like a comprehensive grasp of the history of thought or anything like that, but I do have a pretty broad background, and I can find a lot of things that I deem interesting or useful and like to bring together and do comparative work with. And I think that's part of what it means to be a philosophical eclectic. It also means that as opposed to somebody who is in a particular movement and identifies with that tradition, my work is really, really, really never done. There's always more to read. There's always more to think about. I don't really have a permanent home, you might say, although I'm welcome in many places and happily so, unless somebody wants to kick me out for not being properly orthodox. What I see the task for myself is, these days, a lot of it is what I do here on YouTube. There's so many wonderful, interesting thinkers whose thoughts that I find valuable, and I want to share them with other people. And then, when I get into particular counseling situations, thinking about particular issues, then I start, applying this one. And a lot of that actually depends on what it is that the people that I'm talking with want to focus on, right? Not everybody is into this philosopher who I'm into. So maybe I use a different language, a different thinker to reach them. And I guess the last thing that I should talk about, since this is not just about philosophical commitments, but also development, how did I end up here? I would say that in many respects, for the good portion of my early philosophical career, I was struggling with two competing desires. And one of them was to get to know as much of the valuable philosophy, whether it's what we call the history of philosophy or whether it was contemporary stuff, to get to know as much of that stuff as I could. I mean, I was just eating it up and going through as much as I could possibly take in and loving it. On the other hand, I did want to have a place where I could be, a tradition in which I could locate myself, a community to which I could see myself as belonging. And very often those two kind of conflict with each other, because to be part of a community often means accepting a certain, we might call it, party line about other philosophers and what took place in the history of philosophy. And I never really found a single narrative that I could really totally buy into, because if somebody would say, well, Aristotle did this and this, or the Christian thinkers in the Middle Ages did this and this, or those postmodernists are doing this and this, I would actually read the figures and I'd be like, well, part of that might be true, but really that's kind of a distortion. And, if you've read this, you wouldn't say that sort of thing. And well, I did read it. And, well, I guess you didn't really read it carefully. You kind of put the blinders on at the start. And I had a lot of experiences like that. And so eventually I had to get okay with being an eclectic. And I suppose what I'll close on is something I brought up in some other videos. So, like I mentioned, people think that I'm coming from this point of view or that point of view or this point of view or that point of view, as if I'm, that's my fundamental commitment, because I like to do justice to the ideas in particular thinkers' works, and I like to present them in a way that's coherent and is somewhat plausible, at least. And so I have a lot of people thinking that I belong to one school or another when I actually don't. But I am, very happy to be engaged in conversations. So, when I go to, like, here at Marquette every year, just down the street, they have a nice Aristotelian conference. Well, then I talk about Aristotle a lot and other people in the Aristotelian tradition. At Stoicon, I'm going to talk mostly about Stoicism. If I'm at the St. Anselm conference, probably I'll talk a lot about St. Anselm, and they're going to talk about Thomas Aquinas too, and some other thinkers. And so it makes perfect sense to me that that's how I would live my life and make use of the remaining years that are left to me to study and teach and do some scholarship and do some presentations and application of philosophy. So, I've come to be comfortable. It didn't happen right away, but I've come to be comfortable with being an eclectic, seeing that's where I'll probably be for a long time. I don't know. I might end up, departing from that and saying, I'm definitely going for this school or definitely going for that school. You never know, right? But that doesn't look like what's in the cards for me. And again, I don't have any problem with other people wholeheartedly, saying my mind, my heart, my spirit belongs to so-and-so, right? That's great. That's just not where I'm going. And it makes the dialogue, the ongoing conversation that is philosophy, a lot more fun if we do have people who are genuinely hardcore committed, I think. So that's enough about this topic. I'll be interested to see what your comments are, and hope that this fills you in. Those of you that have been asking me for these more personal videos about me and what it is that I think and how I do philosophy.